Earlier this week, the federal New Democratic Party put forward a motion asking the government of Canada to recognize Palestine as a state. Now, that request was watered down. The entire motion did eventually pass with much softer language, but it also included provisions about stopping the export of weapons to the state of Israel as its ongoing siege of Gaza continues. Now, that motion is a non-binding motion. It wasn't forcing the government to do anything. But then yesterday, the foreign minister, Mélanie Joly, came out and confirmed that yes, indeed, Canada would be stopping exports of arms to Israel. To talk about this very unexpected and somewhat confusing development, I'm joined by Rachel Small, who is an organizer with World Beyond War, an organization that has been campaigning vigorously over recent months to have an arms embargo in place in Canada. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Desmond.
Um, as I mentioned, you've been campaigning around this for some time now. I wonder what you make of this really unexpected and somewhat unclear announcement by Mélanie Joly, about which there are still very few details.
Yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, it was very disappointing in the ways that the motion was watered down on Monday night, sort of in the 11th hour before it was passed by a vote by a majority of members of parliament. But as you said, it did finally include the language that Canada would cease the further authorization and transfer of arms exports to Israel. That that is the language of a one-way arms embargo, demanding that Canada stop exporting weapons to Israel. And now, with the updates that we're hearing yesterday and today, as Mélanie Joly is sort of making statements about what Canada is actually going to do to follow up on this non-binding motion, we're getting a little bit of a clearer picture of what this might look like. So it seems like what the Canadian government is looking to do now is to suspend all further approvals of weapons export permits to Israel. So basically, the Canada will no longer, the specifically Global Affairs Canada, will no longer be receiving applications for Canadian companies to export military goods to Israel. That appears to be what they're actually going to be moving forward with in reality right now. That's a really big deal. That's a really strong message to Israel and frankly, on the global scale, that Canada is not going to be approving weapon sales to Israel for, they haven't said for how long, but presumably for not just a day, presumably for the foreseeable future while this genocidal violence is happening. And this is a big deal and something that no one would have seen coming a few months ago because of just how deep and unflinching an ally to Israel the Canadian state has always been. However, what we do not think they are currently committing to doing based on the statements that they have made over the past day or so is it does not appear like they are going to be stopping the transfer of weapons that have already been approved. So basically, these weapons companies have to apply for a permit from the Canadian government to be able to export these controlled goods because they're weaponry, they're military goods. They have to apply for a permit to export them to Israel, and then they have to actually transfer them, like build them, prepare them, and transport them to Israel. Um, Usually an arms embargo, and certainly what the people across the country have been demanding out of an arms embargo, is that it stops the flow of weapons to Israel. Not just you don't approve new permits, but you don't allow any more weapons to go there. It doesn't look like they're doing that second part. It looks like they're saying we're not approving any more permits, but any previously approved permits, oh, we're not going to stop them. Again, this is truly breaking news. Like there was an article that came out literally 5 minutes ago, and so we don't have this information yet, but this to me is where we absolutely need to push really hard right now because um, while it is huge, the government has moved a huge amount to even get to the place where they say we're going to stop accepting permits. It makes a mockery of our demands when we know that they approved a record-breaking amount of permits October to December. If they're still going to send those weapons that they approved, this is not an arms embargo.
Okay, so then, Rachel, the obvious follow-up question is, if this falls so far short of the demands of World Beyond War, why do you describe it as a big deal? Why do you see this as an important moment in your campaign?
I think we have to recognize that while the government is extremely far from where we need them to be, to put it mildly, this is an incredible move from where they were a few months ago. And frankly, even the headlines that are starting to come in this hour right now in mainstream Israeli media, they're freaking out about this. Like it is a very powerful symbol on the global stage, or it's a very powerful um, announcement that Canada is no longer going to be approving and sending over weapons. Canada is one of Israel's biggest allies in the world. This is a strong message that this sort of unconditional support for Israeli military violence can shift globally, and frankly, for other countries to see, oh, Canada is going to stop exporting weapons. It's a sign to activists and Palestinians in other countries. Oh, we can win this as well. Um, yeah, it's important in that way. However, it's now on us here across so-called Canada to make sure that no more weaponry gets there. And I also want to be clear that the demand for an arms embargo is for a two-way arms embargo, for Canada to not only stop sending weapons to Israel, but also stop buying military goods from Israel. Canada is one of the Israel's biggest customers for their military goods. And Israel has been really explicit in saying this is how they are going to pay for their war, is through our increased arms industry sales. So Israel's already a huge arms exporter in the world, but increasing their military sales is how they plan to pay for their current genocidal violence. So for Canada to continue funding that by buying these weapons, um, yeah, is horrific and is unacceptable. I mean, Canada is already Israel's sixth largest arms customer, and this looks to be uh, only expanding. So we need to be clear that we welcome the news that they're not going to approve any more weapons permits, but we expect them to also block the transfer of all currently approved permits, like no more weapons getting on ships and going to Israel right now. And we expect them to stop purchasing military goods from Israel as well.
World Beyond War has been really active in recent weeks and months, organizing demonstrations, blockading factories, organizing demonstrations where people have attended businesses that sell technology to the state of Israel. For our listeners, full disclosure and viewers, full disclosure, I actually attended and participated in one of those demonstrations in February. What do you think the impact of those direct actions has been in bringing us to the point where the government made this announcement today?
I think it's been hugely impactful, but all across this country, like literally from coast to coast, many thousands of people have been not just protesting in the streets every week, not just sending emails to their MPs and phoning their MPs, which is all important, but physically using their bodies to block the operations of weapons factories that are arming Israel. Basically saying that as people of conscience who are witnessing on our screens every night the horrific violence that's playing out, we have to do literally everything in our power to take action against genocide. And where we know that there are weapons factories, like in some cases, almost literally in our backyards, all across this country that are directly providing the weapons of war that are being used against Palestinians, like, frankly, of course, we have to show up there and do everything we can to interrupt their operations. And I think that's been hugely impactful in getting this movement to where it is today and forcing the Canadian government to move on this. Um, yeah, and in frankly scaring these companies and eroding the idea that the military industrial complex is untouchable, that it's just this all-powerful global entity. It's like maybe it's that, but also it's happening right here in our cities. Like workers are part of this chain and can disrupt it.
Let me ask you about um, what we can think about beyond the two-way arms embargo that World Beyond War is calling for. There are over 30,000 people who have been killed in Gaza since October 7th. There are over 70,000 people who have been wounded as a result of Israel's siege. Um, there are more than 1 million people who are at risk of starvation, which has been brought on by this assault and the complete lack of access, to humanitarian aid, to food, to clean water. Our government is saying to me with this motion in some way, we see that, we are opposed to it. It has to stop. But if the government really wanted to put its full weight behind those words, what would you imagine the Canadian government would do, could do?
It should absolutely be looking at what are, yeah, the other ways that Canada has deep partnership with the state of Israel and is deeply supporting what's happening now. So beyond the weapons trade, I mean, Canada, there's the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement, which should be canceled, suspended, or at the very, very minimum, they should be restricting the import of products under this free trade agreement from the occupied West Bank. Like that is such a low bar that is shameful that it has not happened yet. This is an important way that Canada has an influence on the operations of the Israeli state is through these economic ties and these free trade agreements. We should be looking in terms of other economic tools on targeted sanctions on those who hold military power and decision making within the Israeli government. They should not be able to travel freely. They should not be able to come to Canada. We should be making it really diplomatically clear um, that we condemn their actions and they're unacceptable. I mean, in terms of other diplomatic steps, Canada historically votes against any UN resolution that upholds Palestinian rights, right? There has been a couple exceptions in several decades. Canada should be voting at the international level uh, to stand against the horrific violence that's happening. I mean, Canada has been saying we calling for a ceasefire. There are many things that they can do to make that demand real. I mean, in terms of other ways that funds flow from Canada to Israel, over which the Canadian state has quite a lot of control. There are many charities in Canada that frankly are likely already contravening the CRA regulations that already exist because they're funneling money to the Israeli military, to illegal West Bank settlements. These should not actually even be allowed under CRA regulations, but they're not really being investigated, and that's what's happening. And I mean, this came to the fore in the media recently when people have been really protesting against Indigo CEO Heather Reisman because she founds and is the primary funder of the Hessig Foundation, which specifically funds lone soldiers to go serve in the IDF. So this is an example of a charity that is using its charitable status to avoid paying taxes, so to take money basically from the state and then funnel it to the Israeli military. That's not only illegal, but would be a way to actually cut off actually a humongous amount of funds that do travel from Canada to Israel and to the military. Um, there's also all sorts of security collaborations that exist where Canadian military supports policing that's happening in Palestine, where the Canadian military and the Israeli military have all sorts of intelligence agreements. Like there's all sorts of these kind of behind the scenes, maybe not as much in the limelight, collaborations between these two states that really see themselves as allies. If you're serious about getting Israel to stop what it's doing, you cut those ties. You make there be a political and economic cost to Israel for what it's continuing to do.
How can people who are interested get more information about and connect with World Beyond War?
We are, we're on social media everywhere, globally as World Beyond War and as World Beyond War Canada. I would encourage people, I think, especially to go to worldbeyondwar.org/stop arming genocide, where we've been really focusing on these are some concrete things you can do to get Canada to stop arming genocide. We've been doing a ton of research with some incredible allies across the country and some, frankly, tons of people who are just giving enormous amounts of their time to do the deeply unglamorous work in spreadsheets, in Google searches, for hundreds of hours to track down who are these weapons companies across Canada that are arming Israel. None of this information is public in any way, and it's just through really tedious research that people have been able to dig it up. But therefore, what we now have is a map of 160 something places across Canada, weapons companies that are involved in arming the state of Israel. And our map is an invitation to find one near you and let them know what you think about the fact that they're contributing to what's happening.
Rachel Small of World Beyond War Canada, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Reporting for Yes Everything, this is Desmond Cole. Find us online at www.yeseverything.ca and reach out to us at yeseverythingca@gmail.com. Thanks for watching.